Welcome to the Mission Manhood Podcast, where mature masculinity is celebrated and encouraged. My name is Angela Abide, and I will be your host. Every week or so, I sit down with a man who is in the men's movement, helping men grow and thrive in their masculinity, someone who is exhibiting characteristics of mature masculinity, or someone who has a perspective that might be beneficial for those who are seeking to grow and develop in that area. As a woman, I have a unique perspective as a mother and a therapist, and I hope to contribute to the conversation in those ways. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Hey, I'm glad you're here. This is a special episode of the Mission Manhood Podcast for several reasons. First of all, I started the Mission Manhood Instagram page a couple of years ago, almost 2 years ago. And then last year around this time, I started the Mission Manhood Podcast. And through those two things, I've met, encountered, interviewed, talked to so many wonderful men. I've learned so much. And over the course of that time, I have a handful of men that I would consider my true brothers. And David Jurasek is one of those men. And we met on Instagram like I've met other people. And a couple of times we've gotten together just to have discussions, just to share the feminine perspective with the masculine perspective, to ask each other questions and really help each other in our work that we're trying to do to help men. And for me, one of the main things that I seek to do is help men to heal so that they can be all that they're meant to be in the world. And part of that healing has to do with their relationship, not only with their biological mother, but their relationship with women in general, and then with the Great Mother or the Spirit of Life. And David had an idea that he wanted to have a conversation, maybe for some of the men that he works with a woman about the mother wound specifically. So that's what this episode is. It's really a conversation that was led by David. So it's not in the usual style of the Mission Manhood Podcast, but I just think it's a really beautiful conversation, and it is a real picture of what I know is possible for men and women in masculinity and femininity. And it's just a beautiful picture of what happens when those two energies dance together. And I've heard a lot of people say that for the feminine, one of the highest forms of love for the feminine is just to be seen, to have the masculine open the heart and hold that space for her just to dance. And I think if you listen, you'll hear that I'm just so freely sharing my ideas because there was a safe space for that. And then at the end, the blessing was just super meaningful to me. And I want to thank David and thank you for joining. And I hope that you enjoy this episode.
All right. Wow. Angela, hello.
Hi.
I'm so delighted to see you. We have had some deep and wonderful conversations about the relationship between a son and a mother. This is deep terrain.
Yes.
And I wanted to take a little bit of time today to dig into the wounding that can happen between a mother and a son. And I want to also make room for this, even though men are listening, that we can speak to the wounding on the mother's side. I really believe that wounding is just a part of life. No one gets out of it unscarred, especially as we're growing up in a family. There's several times in our lifetime we get wounded, and we either grow through that wound to the next phase of life, or that wound festers and sabotages us and holds us stunted in an earlier phase of life. And I think for the men that are listening, the wound between the mother and the son is most mysterious, most confounding. A lot of men that I know in doing men's work have looked deeply into their relationship with their fathers, right? and their brotherhood, and they're constantly kind of reminded of the things that came up with dad. But often it's so beguiling how do we relate to women in our lives. There's often men, and myself included, have had times where I've just kind of found it even just so hard to describe what happened and make sense of it and how it's impacting me in the present. So I'm so excited that we get to dig into this together, and I get to hear your side of this. And
yeah, as a mother, and I've been trying to put some thoughts together in the form of an outline to hopefully write something about it, just based on my observations with my 23 years of experience of raising men and with clients, and just trying to look for patterns and see if I can come up with something that might be valuable to people. It's interesting that we're sitting here together and you've been wounded by a mother and I've done the wounding, and to your point, no matter how good your intentions are, no matter how great you want to be, how perfect you want to be, everyone across the board has something to forgive their parents for. And that relationship between the mother and the son is specific. And there are things that you should have received that you didn't, and there are things that you didn't receive that you should have. So it gets complicated. And then another complicating factor is her relationship with the father, or lack of. And is she allowed to do her job? Is she prevented from doing her job? Is she having to do his job too? So it gets really, really complicated when we dive into someone's specific experience. And lastly, to your point about wounding and growth, I just started this exercise program, and the guy's telling us what happens to your muscles as you exercise them. They get tiny little cuts. And he told us about the things that rush in to heal that. And it causes scar tissue, which causes it to grow. And that's what you're after. You're after growth. And a lot of times the error that the mother makes is preventing that. She prevents the wounding. She prevents the suffering in an effort to protect the child.
Yeah. And if we kind of carve it out a little bit to keep it clear, that there's the relationship between the mother and the father, and how the son sees their relationship forms a model for him about relationships. And that's complex enough.
Yeah.
But if we just look at it, I mean, we could spend hours dissecting that. But if we look at just the son and his mother, what you just said takes me right to that. Working with families for 25 years, that's the most common thing I see, is that mothers want to protect their sons from harm, from getting bruised, from being humiliated, from all kinds of vicissitudes and hardship. And in some way, isn't that right? Isn't that appropriate that the mother exudes that nurturance and that care and that protective instinct? But then that desire to protect them from wounding is a wound in itself, because it's suffocating. I've seen so many boys become anxious and unsure of themselves because they look to their mom. Is it okay? Am I safe? Can I go out there? They don't have the confidence to just go out there and fumble around and come back in and get their wounds licked. And so by trying to protect our children from wounding, we wound them in a way. And I think that can come from a father or a mother, but the mother, because we come from the womb, it's so primal, it's so direct.
Yeah. And what I've learned through all this time and working with people is the mother's responsibility is to push her son away from herself. It starts on day one, right? The baby's growing in her belly, and her first great act of bringing him forth into the world is this tremendous effort to push him out of her body. Never ends. The next thing is you push him off of your body when it's time to wean him. You've pushed him away from you when he's trying to cling to your skirt on the playground. It's continual pushing away. And it seems cruel. It's just a terrible balance of knowing when they're ready for that, when it's appropriate to pull them back in. And that's just parents in general. You're having to learn for each individual child, if you have more than one child too, because there's no formula for that.
Right.
Some boys are ready to be pushed away at 5. Some of them are ready at 7. And it's not a complete pushing away. It's to the next level, kind of like a video game. You're ready now. I'm going to put you up to the next level, which comes with responsibilities
in my work with families, I found that there's way too much pressure put on moms to do the holding and the pushing.
Mhm.
What I've heard from in healthy cultures, there's rituals of rites of passage where the men will take the boys from the mother's arms and the mothers will cry and cling for the boys and the men take them away into the woods. So we kind of knew instinctively that the mother shouldn't do it all. She shouldn't have to shield them and hold them close and push them away. And
Mhm.
yet we live in a kind of fragmented world where you have to do that often.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be some ways that we mess it up. We wait
Yeah.
too long to push them out, or we push
Yeah.
them out too soon, or
Yeah. Sometimes circumstances beyond our control come up, like somebody gets ill and then the child's forced to go to a new level that they're not really ready to go to. So
mm,
that can form a wound. And it was really nobody's fault. I mean, it was just a tragedy in the family. To your point, exactly. If you're studying this in terms of archetypes, that dance between the mother and father is just this flow and a continual consulting. And she's, I think, pushing the father off, like, it's not time, it's not time, it's not time. But eventually, the boy should go and live more in the father's house before he ever leaves. And so
mm,
then the mother's more of a consultant. I think you're pushing him too hard. I don't think he's quite ready for that. And
mm,
they're dancing with each other for what's best for this child.
mm.
Perfect balance never happens.
No,
Never. Even in the
no.
best intentioned families.
Yeah. Yeah. And that boy is going to get wounded either way because he's going to have to leave the nest. And that itself can be overwhelming and traumatizing. Right.
Yeah.
I was born with RH factor blood. So I needed to be in the hospital for 3 months. And that solidified in my mom this idea that I was weak and I needed to be protected physically and then emotionally. So she really, created a nurturing, loving environment. But as I was growing up in my teens and close to my 20s, she wanted to hold on to me too tightly. So I felt that suffocating feeling, that trapped feeling. And then I spent 15 years being in relationships and running away whenever I felt that suffocated feeling.
Yeah.
Like, I feel loved by you, but you're controlling me. I can't breathe. I need to get out of here. It took me 15 years not to be cognitively aware of that, because I was pretty aware that I was running away and that I was feeling trapped. But it took me 15 years to process that wound so I could stop running and embrace the person that was trying to love me.
Yeah. I think men have this pressure that once they're out, once they're away from their mother, like that's over. Even in the men's movement, I see so much of join the brotherhood, join the men, go forth, be the alpha, be the leader, whatever. And for me, part of it between initiation and a full going into brotherhood, there's this period, this free fall, this place, this dark night of the soul where you really need to examine what in the world happened to me? Who raised me? What happened to me? Work on forgiveness, work on reconciliation, try to understand what you didn't get that you should have gotten, because your job is to do that for yourself. And like you said, it took you 15 years to get that. What if we just had a manual that said, hey, once you leave your parents' house, before you go off and pick the person that you want to be with, because a lot of times men are outsourcing that need, whatever they didn't get, or maybe it was something toxic that they did get that they're trying to solve with their next relationship. But if you could go through and kind of do this first level healing and kind of see that, you would pick a better partner for yourself, not based on your need to be validated, but on your desire to be partnered with somebody who's compatible with you.
Oh, that's so true. And I think you speak to that, the manual, and more like the reparenting experience, having a
Yes.
healthy relationship with a female mentor, having sisters, having women who teach you how to relate to them in a healthier way, in a freer way, in a respectful and mutual way. It's so vital. And I'm so grateful. I know men in their 20s who come to me saying, I've had a really fucked up childhood. Relationships, I can't be in a relationship, and I'm not running to the next woman and projecting all my mommy issues on her. I want to pause and look at myself and heal, and how it takes time, and it's deep work.
It is. It takes a lot of courage too. And I always say the first thing is you have to be willing to see. And that's huge, just to be willing to see. And then you have to learn to see. After you're willing, you have to learn. So, okay, I'm willing to go there. I know that there's stuff in me that I need help with. So I'm willing. And then learning to see might involve going to a mentor or a coach or a therapist, and they're going to, in their expertise, go, okay, this is some things that should have happened. What is your story? What happened to you? And allowing yourself to see and learning what's important, what you might have missed out on. It's painful.
Yeah. Wow. I want to get a little more specific. You talked about the pushing away and holding them close, but also pushing them away to a degree, right? And I every boy that I've ever worked with, when you ask them what they need, they always look at their mom if she's in the room. And I often don't get anything out of them, or they don't know what they need. And then I say to them, do you feel like you want more space? And it's like every hand in the room goes up. Every boy's like, yeah. Do you wish your parents, especially mom, would get off your back and let you make mistakes, let you take risks and try stuff? Every hand goes up. So I know that that's a core theme for us as men growing up and taking that into our relationships, is feeling freedom and space to be ourselves authentically with our female partner. There's another wound that I want to bring up because I don't want to neglect it, which is growing up, having parents, especially with the mother and son, where the mother doesn't see you.
Yeah.
Where you're only seen if you're the good boy, if you do as she wishes, if you play a certain role. And it happens with dad too, right? Performing and pleasing and all of that. There's something like really, for me at least, it's been really deep, that one, to feel like I don't exist as a separate, unique person. She only sees me how she wants to see me. And how we take that into our relationships, how we crave approval, or how we crave to be witnessed. And that wound is just too overwhelming for our partner.
It is, yeah.
It needs a space to be healed, and it needs to be put in context. I wonder if you have, to speak to that, if you've encountered that. Or
one thing that I'm thinking of, so many of the men that I'm working with or that have come in, they're willing to see, they want to see it. They're dealing with mental illness at some level, whether it was postpartum depression or whether their mother was wounded by someone and she's carrying her issues. She was parented in a way and she's overcompensating, trying to protect you. Maybe she was neglected. And so as an adult, you can kind of zoom out and start to see that. And so that's good for you to see that as an adult, but that never changes the reality for that little boy part within you. And I think that's where sometimes people make a mistake. They get it in their mind and they don't minister to the child within.
Right.
And, I would just say for all the men listening, that is your job. You have to become a great mother and a great father to yourself, to your little boy part. And so when you learn to hold the space for that woundedness when it pops up, you learn to manage that part in a very loving way. So if something happens in real time with my female partner and that's activated, instead of responding to that from that part, I can say, okay, I'm going to need a minute to go meditate on this. Something just popped up for me. And I just go work that out. And you can take the time that you need and sit with that little part. And you're either going to go, yep, she crossed a boundary, or this is not that. So I don't need you to worry about that for me. I can handle that from my adult self. And you trust me with this. And so you start to minister to that child, like, okay, so that little boy part starts to look at you instead of continually being reminded of parental wound, the mother wound.
Oh my gosh. So this is really deep because you're not just saying reparent yourself. I think that's evident to anyone who's done any work on themselves, right? But what's really profound for me in what you just said is that there's a father and there's a mother inside of me, a masculine and feminine presence, and I need to evolve those parts and flex those muscles and use them with my inner child. And I mean, yeah, this gets really deep because I think what men most do when we're on a healing path is we go one way or the other. We develop the masculine or the feminine, and we get kind of plateaued and stuck there. I'm really good at accomplishing things in the world. I've made peace with my dad. Da da da. That's the easier path. I think the harder path is to get into the nurturing, the loving energy of the mother inside of us, and to like embrace the dark side of the mother too.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can be with my daughter, I can be smothering too.
Mm-hmm.
I can be controlling and manipulative. And I learned those patterns from my mom, and she's a lovely woman. I learned those from her, and I can replicate those internally and externally. And I can also evolve and release and let go and be more nurturing, more accepting, more direct and clear. Yeah.
What I find men do a lot of times is they'll come in, they've got the willingness to see, but then when you start to try to show them how to see it, they get very defensive, like she did the best she could. I mean, she had her own problems. So I invite them, okay, I get that here. To have compassion for someone is evidence that you've healed, right? And so it's not just a dismissal of it. It's we have to look at this for the healing of your inner child. And just getting centered and allowing that to kind of rise up. Where do you feel that in your body when she would speak to you? Where did you feel that in the pit of your stomach? Allowing them to really feel that so that they can then have compassion on their inner child, as well as in their brain, have compassion for this flawed human woman who maybe did the best that she could. So I can hold both of those.
Mm-hmm.
And it's possible. And a lot of people want to do one or the other. They get stuck with the woundedness, or they get stuck with she did the best she could. So I'm not even going to go there. I should be okay. And a lot of men feel super justified with maintaining their inner critic, and almost like they need that inner critic. So if I say, who do you talk to in your life the way that you talk to yourself? No one. And working on stop criticizing yourself that way, recognizing, whose voice that is in the first place, who influenced that voice, what is that part of you trying to protect you from? And so you learn to manage that as well. So you're a valuable part of my team. I want your feedback. I want you to tell me what you're seeing, but at the same time, I'm not going to let you insult me. I wouldn't let anybody insult me. I wouldn't let, a person in the grocery store insult me like that. Just learning to manage all the parts and to ask, the critic for some space so that you can do the work that you need with this inner child. Because your inner critic is going to say things like, that is just so stupid. That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Are you still dealing with that? Really? We're still dealing with that? So we're so mean to ourselves, and we don't give ourselves the space that we need to do that healing work.
And it can get so sticky. Right? We can think, oh, that's my voice. I need that. That's helping me to grow. It keeps me tough. It helps me to be smart. And we can really defend that abusive, harsh, negative tone. Yeah. I love the way you put that though, because just an hour ago, I was sitting with a dear friend, and the critic, he's going through a life change and he's really beating himself up. And my first response with my critic in the past that's been most potent has been, give me something helpful, or sit down and shut the fuck up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Be articulate, give me something. And I've had to evolve that part. I couldn't get rid of it. I don't want to have a dull blade. I want to have a sharp mind and distinguish between things. So I need a critical mind, but a critical mind that is helpful.
Not abusive.
Right. And I think that in a way that's also modeled by dad in a way, but I think especially by mom. Can she be loving and nurturing? But sometimes tell me the truth, cut into me in a loving way. Do we have experiences of that, of our mother telling us something true that's painful that we swallow and take in and are grateful? Or do we often have a mother that's too nice and hides everything. And she's judging and critical, but she doesn't say it. Or a mother who's very critical and very hard. And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, it's so hard to stick the landing. So even if you're trying, you might do a pretty good vault, but you might splatter on the landing. And that's what happens between mothers and children. I mean, I'm trying to do my best, and then bam. And that's different for each kid. So if I learn something on the first kid and I'm trying to replicate it on the second one, I'm going to fall flat on my face.
Yeah.
So you have to keep learning. Calibrating, I guess, would be a good way to look at it.
Well, you spoke a few minutes ago about what you tell men when they're kind of encountering this. And I guess the question is, like, if a man is listening and he's wondering, do I have a mother wound? Or what's in the way with my partner? We're fighting a lot, or we're not getting along all the time. My invitation is to go into the felt sense, into the body. And when you face your partner, your female partner, what comes up? And to take stock of the array of emotions. I feel love and gratitude. I also feel fear of speaking up and saying something to upset her. Oh, well, look at that. Or I feel kind of bored and restless. I need more. I'm not getting enough. And that's the place for me to look at and start. And it's so easy to just say, well, that's my issue. That's my problem. I'll go to therapy or whatever. But to tie it to the mother-son relationship really anchors it into, this isn't who I am. Mm-hmm. This is a place where I'm developmentally stuck, but I can grow. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really helpful to kind of anchor that back to, where did this start? Where did it get stuck? Oh, right. That's the way my mom treated me 1,000 times before I left the household at 18. So that's ingrained in my nervous system. That hasn't gone away magically because I have self-awareness or insight. That's in my nervous system. And I can heal that. I can evolve that. I can relate to my own mom better. I can relate to my partner better. That really excites me when men get that real with themselves, or they stop blaming their partner or thinking there's something wrong with them, and they can just name it as what's phenomenologically happening in their nervous system. Mm-hmm. That's a powerful place to be. And they don't blame their mom, but they don't let her off the hook either. Yeah.
You said, do I have a mother wound? The answer is yes, absolutely. 100% everybody does. It might not be intentional. It might not be terrible, but yes, the way that you think was conditioned by the way you were raised. And so sometimes that's not calibrated quite right, even if you had a great childhood and your parents made mistakes. And like we said, tragedies happened. Things happen, like even the birth of a next child gets their mind off of you for a minute. And maybe you got dropped through the cracks a couple of times. Yes, everybody has wounds. But the thing I love about people who are willing to see and willing to do the work is it's possible to get pretty efficient with your inventory. And so just like I said earlier, if your partner says something that completely activates you, and we've all had that experience, like you're driving down the road on a sunny day, and then all of a sudden something explodes in you. And it's like, what just happened? And so taking the time that you need, even if you can't do it in that moment, and say, let's revisit this because I just had a big reaction, starting to normalize those conversations with a partner, then you take the time that you need to examine it. Is this something that might have come from my childhood? I'm not really getting that sense. You start to be able to get the sense of it. Was it my bad behavior? Possibly. Yes, I kind of dropped down into adolescence, so she was reacting to that. Okay, then maybe I owe her an apology. Or maybe it was my partner's bad behavior and I need to set a boundary. So you start to get very efficient once you're willing to see, and then things stay clear. The driveway's clear. You guys can take off anytime you want to. But if you let all that stuff build up, so it could be a lot of different things, a lot of different factors. I
love that. I thought, to me, that's the warrior. It's like, well, it doesn't matter what it is. What am I going to do about it?
What am I going to do about it? Yeah.
How am I going to pick up the ball and pick up the pieces and make this better and move on? And I think that on one level, that's absolutely necessary. The skillfulness of how do I repair rupture in a relationship? I know when men don't have that skill, they're almost destined for divorce. Yeah. And kids hating them in 20 years. When we know how to repair, without just saying sorry, being nice guy, but actually repair, to me, it's a game changer. And what you just spoke about, that way of having that inventory, recalibrating, readjusting, getting back on track. So I think that's one piece. The other piece, though, as I find, is that when the wound is so strong that we know we need to do all of those things. We've even trained and taught other people how to do it. We've taught, nonviolent communication, and we've trained in level 5 of this or that. And the wound is still so strong that it floods our nervous system, our brain. And to me, I find it really helpful to have tools for emotional healing and often to kind of get a handle on what thread is the needing healing, because it just feels overwhelming. It's like it's all black. I'm bad, you're bad, everything's bad, relationship is bad or something. So I kind of go back to a really simple model that I've developed working with dads and boys mostly for 25 years. Is I look at like the core needs. There's a need for safety and security and trust. And in that one, if that is wounded, I feel like a victim. Things are happening to me and I fear being abandoned. I fear being betrayed. That's very powerful fear-based wound. Mm-hmm. The world is not safe. That's different from number 2, I think, of feeling of suffocation that I mentioned, feeling trapped. I'm not free. I need space. That one is usually tied to guilt for me. Boys are, I can't leave the mother's side because she'll make me feel bad. So therefore, I'm in this bind. When we start to resolve guilt, we start to feel our own sense of freedom and spaciousness. It's not that we have to push anyone away. The third one is around power. And it's when men are fixers, when they're managers, when they're constantly trying to manage everyone's reaction, hyper aware, trying to control things, fix everything. And then that one comes up around anger, frustration, and that sense of losing control that we can have internally. The fourth one is when we've been wounded in the core of our loving natures, where we've been rejected. We've been pushed away by our mother as unlovable, as unwanted.
Yeah.
Or we've just displeased her. And therefore we're sent to our room. It's so common, right? It's not even intentional sometimes. When you're hurt as a mother, you just turn away because you're wounded yourself. And then
some parenting programs are encouraging you to do that. Separate yourself from the child as a form of, discipline.
It starts with the infant. The baby's crying, let him cry it out.
Yeah.
That sense of we only want you when you're nice. That feeling of rejection. And then the last one is that the one that I mentioned for me personally, that feeling of, with rejection, there's a grief to it. There's a loss to it. But the last one is insignificant. I'm unworthy. I'm looked down on. I'm just invisible. I don't exist. It's all about my mom, what she wants, how she wants me to be. And that one comes up shame. Shame, I find, is one of the hardest ones for men because they can kind of identify anger and those other issues. They can kind of spot it. But with shame, it's so sticky. It's so close. Mm. I find it so helpful to be able to say, oh, that came up with my mom. She carries a lot of shame.
Yeah.
She wasn't allowed to be herself. She had to play all these roles and fit in and try to survive that way and get noticed. And then she trained me that way. And now I'm fighting with my partner because she's not listening to me or I don't feel seen and heard.
Yeah.
I find it helpful when we can kind of find the through line or the theme to our wound. Because to me, there's enormous hope. Because if I know, okay, here's where I'm wounded, here's where it started, I'm more likely to do the work, to do the healing, because I start to see, oh, well, just like you said earlier with the muscles are torn and then they heal. When a physical wound is made, it festers, it gets worse. But if I start to put salve on it, if I start to address it, you start to see benefit right away. Subtle at first, right? But you start to see, wow, I'm a little less critical with my daughter. Wow, I'm a little more present with my wife. this is going well. What am I doing? How can I do this more? I also feel like the wound is a place for purpose and meaning. So the exact ways that I was wounded are the ways that I can give the most to the world. That's why I thank my mom at some point for wounding me in those ways, because now I see more clearly what my gift is.
Yeah, and you're able to use that, transform that into life.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that's what we're meant to do.
Yeah.
We heal so that we can transform that and we can help others heal.
Mm-hmm. We've dug into this. We're talking about it, and we both are in the field. We're in the trenches daily, where we're actually helping men not only to recognize this and have insight, but to actually walk through it.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to say before we move on is sort of going in the weeds and figuring out your wound.
Yeah.
Some people don't want to do that. Some men don't want to do that because their brain is just like, give me the answer, give me the solution. Okay. And for them, it's like, your mother was mentally ill. Gotcha. Your job is to be a better mother to yourself. Okay, show me how to do that. They're just very efficient. They don't want to go over every feeling. They don't want to go over every wound. It's enough for them. And so for some clients, when that tempest starts to kind of swirl within them, they can stop and say, my mother had a mental illness. I can take care of you. So they can, invite the little child onto their lap. They can listen to the concerns. They can be that good, nurturing parent that they need. So it's forgiven. It's over. That's the past. And I'm going to do a good job in the present. It just depends on your personality, right? Some people need all the answers. They need to see it very clearly so that they can move on. Other people don't. So there's the right way to do it is when you get to a point where you feel immense self-love and you know how to manage your thoughts and emotions in a way that you can operate in a way that you can look in the mirror and be proud of the guy that's looking back at you. I didn't go off the handle at anybody today. I was nice to myself. I didn't cuss myself out for cutting that person off in traffic or whatever. So I can get to an authentic way of being. And that's really the point. There are different ways to get there.
That's beautiful. And I'm glad you say that. I do think it's worth noting that there are traps, that you can spend 20 years in therapy analyzing yourself, knowing everything about your childhood, but not moving on, not healing. And I do think you can bypass and say, yeah, my mother had mental illness. Yeah, I don't. And I think for me, where the rubber hits the road, where real healing happens is when you get into the body and you feel, and you don't have to dwell on it. You just feel the stuff and you move through the stuff. So when you're holding that, if you're that guy who doesn't need to know all the why, and you just want to get in there and do better, can you get through that doorway? That's your inner child needs very specific type of healing. Does he need to be reassured that he's safe? Or is it more like he just needs to be seen? That's different, right? It's a different flavor, different energy. So with those guys, I love that, because they're ready to just go in there and do it. But they need to slow down sometimes and see what the medicine is.
Yes.
And they need to just acknowledge the wound before they can heal it.
Right. If you're doing it correctly, if you're working with a therapist, or if you're just learning it, when you feel that activation in your body, you start to recognize when it's your inner child, when you need some love and care. And if you can just retreat. And sometimes I'll say in the middle of the day, I can't do that right now. I'm in the middle of this, but I promise you tonight, I'll sit down on the porch with a glass of wine and I'll go there. And so it's just keeping your word to yourself, making time to do that. Okay, tell me what that was about. You just get really quiet. You go to that feeling in your body. You let it sort of bubble up, and it's like, oh, yeah. When Marge said that at the water cooler, it reminded me of that time my mother did. And you get it and you see it. And sometimes that's all that little part needed, was to be witnessed. And so it's like, is there anything else you wanted me to see? No, I'm good now. So it's an unburdening. I'm unburdened now. I saw that. I get why you were so upset about that. It's just a validation. So it's not like we're going to be healed and we're never going to deal with it again. This is a life journey. And one other thing I think it's really important to mention to people, so they don't think there's something wrong with them and their ability. There are certain events that are, all of it's trauma,
But some of it is to the level that it's like a PTSD episode. And this happened to me the other day. I'm walking through the doors at the grocery store, and this memory came to me out of nowhere. I have no idea why I even thought of it, but it was a time with my youngest son when he was really, really sick. And in the middle of him being very sick, something really terrible happened. And I became a child in the grocery store walking in, and I started going, no, 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 no. Like, I can't think of that. And immediately I'm flooded with this emotion. It was like one of the worst, most powerless things that has ever happened to me. And so what I'm realizing in that moment is I need some work with that thing. I need some help with that one. And therapy models like EMDR, when you have that moment where the rug was pulled out from under you, you didn't know how to respond. And you can't get there just by ministering to your inner child. There are professionals that can help you do that debugging work with those very specific instances. So I love tools like that, you're working with your therapist and things are going well, but there's this one thing you can't push past. I can go up to a next level of therapy like EMDR or different trauma-based things that are very specific for helping you there.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And there are tools that we can use on our own, but when we're wounded relationally, we need to heal in relationship. And sometimes the presence of that mentor, coach, professional who can handle that darkness, who can be in that crazy town with you is all that's needed. And sometimes the tools are there to help us further and go deeper. And yeah, to me that I hope sincerely that any man who's listening to this realizes there's enormous hope.
Yes.
There are people doing the healing work. There are men who've healed in the way that they are wounded, who can lend their confidence and trust and show them the path they took. None of us can do this alone. We're all learning and growing together. I think in my 20s, when I had a car accident and I ended up in therapy, and I realized if I didn't do this work to heal some of this core stuff enough, I was going to end up in my 30s or 40s being a drunk and dying young. There's a cost. And sometimes the trauma we carry isn't even our own or our parents'. It's ancestral. There's lots of men who come to me with clarity about that piece too. Their great-grandparents suffered genocide and struggles, and it got passed on through the genes. Nobody understands it. It's pre-verbal.
Yeah.
The first few months of our life. And yet it still happened in some way, and it's imprinted. At the same time, we can heal. We can heal our nervous system. To me, that's profoundly hopeful and exciting. And yeah, my wish is that if you're listening to this and you identify you got a mother wound, that you can find people to help you heal that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that in doing my own work and looking back into shadowy moments, like I remember when my little brother was born, doing a little investigation, asking your siblings stories. Do you remember what was going on? Sometimes you get some information that just turns a light on for you. And even as far as headlines of 1972, in October of 1972, what was going on, what just got bombed, what tension was going on. And remembering that every family had the news on every night at 6 p.m. Everybody read the newspaper. We were all conversing. And
right.
Some of those shadows, it's just tension. And if you can allow yourself to see, and then you learn to see, it becomes like you're doing some investigation work. You're a detective. Your curiosity starts to work in favor. And so you're not looking at it as a child who's scared to open the door. You're almost holding the hand of the little child saying, let me look, let me see, I'll look for it. And then you can explain. So you never know how it's going to go. Sometimes it's a de-escalation, and sometimes you're able to actually see what happened. And from an adult, you can hold that for the child.
Right.
And you can love the child through that.
Right. When we're children, we see things in a distorted way also. We take everything personally because we have to survive. Yeah. And sometimes we really misunderstand things. And that can be a trauma, a wound in itself. When adults withhold information and we sense enormous fear in the room, how do we process that? we swallow it. We have to make sense of it somehow.
We make a story around it.
Yeah. And so to me, that always comes back to the work around trauma with Bessel van der Kolk and Gabor Mate around the body keeps score. And I can dig into my memories, which are kind of flawed and mixed up and revised all the time. But my body knows right away if I'm holding tension in my neck, if I'm feeling that nauseous feeling being close to someone I love, there's something there. There's something there to explore and to know that the nervous system wants to feel good and wants to process and move on. So if I'm not feeling good, something is stuck, something is undigested, something, maybe it's been there for 30, 40 years, but it can get processed. It can get worked through. It's not our destiny to feel bad all the time or to feel scared all the time or angry all the time. That tells me that I'm stuck in a loop. There's so much here. Yeah. And my hope is too that men listening to this come to be hungry for healing and learning and growing. And like you said, like that detective, be curious instead of apprehensive and avoidant. There's so much gold in there. There's so much beauty in the healing. There's so much that we bring back to our families when we do the work. We can end generations of trauma.
Yes.
Not just so it doesn't get passed on, but that it gets transformed into something beautiful, into gifts that we pass on to our children.
It's just changing your mindset about it. And recently, everything in the world is just going crazy. And I have this little child part that just wants to shrink back and hide. Recently, I read someone that said, you asked to be here for this time. And what they were saying is, cosmically, I got to choose when I came to Earth. And I decided to come here as a helper during this time. And I'm like, I am hitching to that star. I am going with that. So now every time I get afraid, I can hold that little inner child and say, I chose to be here during this time. I'm a helper and I'm going to help. So it's just this like Superman kind of thing that goes on. So I'm not discounting my child's fear, but I'm telling that child what is also true. I've got this. You come with me and I'll hold you. It's that kind of attitude and that kind of looking at it in a completely different way. I'm not bound to this forever. There's a part of me that's able to handle this. I can do this work for me, learn to love myself. And in doing so, I'm going to do this for my family and the people that are closest to me.
I've been listening to you the last couple of minutes and nodding along vigorously and also thinking, how do we end this conversation? Because there's so much here that we could keep talking about, but I've got an idea. I want to bless you as a mother. Just in the short time I've gotten to know you, you have so much wisdom, hard-earned wisdom that comes from compassion, that comes from suffering, that comes from healing, from seeing yourself more clearly and your sons more clearly. And you're so devoted and dedicated to helping men that is so touching. It feels like the world needs more of that. Men reaching and helping women heal and women helping men heal. It's so rare. And I really appreciate your courage, your honesty, your speaking your wisdom, sharing it through your podcast and here in our conversation. I feel really moved and touched and enlivened and a little bit wiser in your presence.
Well, thank you. You said earlier, does your mother ever look at you and tell you the truth, knowing that it's going to cut you? And this is the place that I feel like would be a great time to do that. Because a lot of people talk about women saying they don't feel safe. I don't feel safe with you. This is the first step, men. This is it. You have to learn to love yourself, or she will always be expected to meet the need that your mother didn't. And when you can learn to love yourself, and she knows that you can manage your own inner parts and your own wounds, she can relax and just be free to be a person who has moods and not always worried all the time that she's going to hurt your feelings or that that mother wound is going to be activated, because you can handle it. You've learned. And also to know that if I am hormonal, or if I'm having a bad day, or if I say something wrong, or if I overstep a bound, you just come and say that. It doesn't become this big thing that I take personally. And now I'm rising up into a mother role because you've descended down into a wounded child. So you being able to handle that and to work on that, and even show her sometimes, look, what just happened, it activated this inner child in me. And sometimes you can allow her to minister to that. She can do that too. And that's what happens in a loving relationship, where you decide what you would like to share and share that with her. It's such a moment of intimacy where she says, wow, I'm weeping for your inner child. She's not weeping for you. You're the man. And inner child that you're showing her, she can weep for that part of you and be compassionate toward that and witness that with you.
Oh, what a beautiful, I mean, that's such a grounded, poignant vision. That's possible for all of us men coming out of the shadow of the mother and healing those wounds. We can get to that place. Absolutely. Yeah. Do you have any last words for men listening?
For men, you're kind of screwed right now with the cultural norms and the, wounds of your past, and being encouraged to act against your nature from society, and being encouraged to act in a way that's not natural. And so men come in apologetic for their masculinity. So I try to encourage them that, no, that is your gift to the world. Cultivate that, learn who you are, and heal your wounds, because we need you. We need you so badly. And your masculinity is a beautiful gift to the world.
Oh, thank you, Angela Bide of Mission Manhood. I need to hear that again and again. That's so poignant and true. Yeah, I wish you power and love in writing that book.
Thank you.
Because I want your message to reach more men.
Yeah,
particularly.
thank you.
You're welcome.